David Andrew Weeb, founder of Spark Infinity niche-based Facebook group. David, what is going on in Spark Infinity?
Spark Infinity has been growing pretty rapidly since January. We started with literally 4 or 5 members, now to well over 1,400 people, serving creatives and creators, poets, artists, visual artists, musicians, actors, actresses.
What should members of Spark Infinity be prepared for? What are the live shows about?
We like to interview people and get a sense of who they are, the kind of things they do, highlight them, and especially their amazingness, their personality, their superpowers, whatever makes them great. That's what we like to highlight in those conversations.
So how could members of Spark Infinity also benefit from Bump Global?
For one thing, there are so many amazing heart-centered founders of various niche-based Facebook groups that if you wanted to be interviewed, you could just put yourself in the middle of the storm and find all kinds of groups to be featured in and interviewed in all day long. And the other thing is, if they have the desire and the work ethic to build their own niche-based Facebook group and blow it up, that's another opportunity that's waiting for them. And I only see things growing from there.
Spark Infinity, it's David Andrew Weeb here. Hope you're having a great day. Today I'm joined by Marie Beswick Arthur. How are you today, Marie?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
That's great to have you. You know, I was reading a little bit about you, and it looks like the writing bug hit you, or like you were just born to write from a young age. What was that like?
Yeah, I started writing and reading when I was 4, and all through school was just that sort of nerdy kid that was just always wanted to turn any class into any way I could do art, which usually involved poetry and a little bit of drawing. And it just went from there. I went into the corporate world, and all I did was volunteer and work on projects that were creative. And then went into social work and writing full-time more than 25 years ago. And just one of those stories where you're like, oh, if only I could just have an article published somewhere. And then you just keep bumping or raising the bar. If only I could get paid for that. If only it was a glossy. And then, you end up these years later I've worked on over 60 books and I've won some really nice awards. So yeah, it's just sort of just rolled. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I think back to my childhood, and it was somewhat unique. I mean, everybody's got a childhood that's different, but when I was 5, I was living in Canada at the time. I was born in Canada. We moved to Japan, so then I grew up in Japan 8.5 years. Having come back to Canada after that experience, I didn't even know how to read yet English, at least not all that well. So I had to pick it up pretty quick, which turns out not as hard as I would have thought. But yeah, I guess I was fascinated by language, maybe because of that experience myself. How did you end up becoming fascinated with language?
Oh goodness. Well, I was a parentified child, so I was a child who liked to escape because she was busy taking care of her mom and having too many responsibilities for what a small child should have. And so my escape was in reading and story. And so I think that started it. And from then on, I say to all the people I teach and mentor in writing, if you're not reading, then the reading makes writers. You can take lots of classes and you can take degree programs, but if you read the good stuff and the not so good stuff, and that's to be determined by yourself, then you're able to pick out maybe how you would want to tell your stories, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. Yeah.
I really tend to agree with that. Reading's played an important part in my journey as a writer, and I really insisted on taking in as much information as I could as I was working on my first few books. Is there a secret to like writing 60 books, or is that just a lot of steady, consistent work over time?
I didn't set out to write that many books, and I haven't completely written. Those are books I've been involved in. It's way over 60. I didn't set out that way. I set out when I was writing life books, which aren't included in that number, for children in what we called back then child welfare system, which is children's services. I just had this very unique job, which I was sort of, I guess, I don't know, blessed to have, where I could interview and write children's lives, so that children who have been removed from their parents' care and they're in foster care or adoptive homes, so they could come to terms with their lives. So it's part psychology, but very much a once upon a time, with all the applesauce and rainbows and all the other stuff too, so that they could understand. That led me to writing a novel, and that took 13 years to write, where I promised, after I'd done 250, 300 narratives for different child clients or sibling groups, that I would put one life book into a novel, so that would be sort of my going away present to myself, because I wouldn't be writing life books anymore. I came to a point where it was a good idea to just stop. And with just so many child stories that I had told. And at that time, I had already been writing little bits and getting paid for little jobs. I just want to say that it's kind of like, this is going to sound so cheesy, but it just came about organically. I didn't know that I was going to be part of over 60 books. I didn't know that I was going to be contracted by different publishers. I just knew I wanted to write, and then I just trusted that process. Yeah.
I love that. And as you say, or kind of you hinted at it, I will say, that the writer's journey can be a humble one, especially when you're first beginning. What is the process like to turning it into a sustainable income?
Wow. Well, when I was first writing, I had 2 jobs, and then became a single parent. And so I was considering having, and that doesn't count the parenting job. And I was considering taking another job at night, serving coffee, so that I could support my writing habit. And I was working in social work at the time, with people with disabilities, people with challenges, that in an agency in Calgary. But the process, I think, was patience and vision. And I guess some faith. Always improving my writing, never thinking that I was, accomplished. I'm still not. I'm still an apprentice, learning from other people. And then, with me, it was, I heard there was a website after I got a couple of magazine articles published. I heard there was a website that you could get paid, and I think it was called Upworks, or it might have been Elance before it was Upworks. And so I signed up with them, and I got a couple of jobs. And through those jobs, the 2 people that I worked with said, "I'd like to hire you privately, and let's go outside of," and that may not be ethical at first. So we finished the contract with the, the go-between. And then I've edited for him for a guy in Washington, D.C. for I guess 12 years now. But what happens is, then I didn't advertise anywhere, word of mouth. Like, I wrote a book for someone out in Cochrane, Alberta. And then the next thing, a friend of theirs in Kentucky saw that book, and she had talked to him. So I did his book. And then it just kind of rolled. And over the years, I would get meet more people at different courses I took. And then all of a sudden I was sort of teaching courses, and that was organic too. And I didn't ever feel like I was qualified to do it, but I still sort of, I guess, just felt the fear and did it anyway. And I knew, outside of having those self-worth issues that many parentified children have, and many regular people have, that there was something inside me that still felt, yeah, okay, you're doing okay. And I guess that built the confidence to say yes to 2 jobs that rolled in. And so I would say patience, confidence, and really hard work. because it's not easy. It's to make a living at it, you're working a lot of hours, but I don't have a choice. That's my calling. I can't just go and get a job doing something else.
Yeah, I think Hank Moody, the character played by David Duchovny in Californication, said it's like having homework every night. Probably someone else said that before he ever did, but always love that line. And when people ask me that, I often share that if you like writing essays all the time, then you'll love writing.
Yeah, and it's more than that. And I love what you just said. It's so much like when I talk to people and they feel intimidated about writing or intimidated about writing for other people, I consider doodling on a napkin or the back of a beer mat is writing, just like Joni Mitchell would say. She wrote many a wonderful song on the back of a beer mat. But I also am involved with therapeutic writing, where that's never edited and that's never touched. It just belongs to the person who's writing it, but it's facilitated by a person who can facilitate that kind of process for healing. But it doesn't have to be the kind of writing that people think, Tolstoy did, because we don't publish things like that anymore. And so again, it goes back to if you've read a lot and you start reading beyond the book, but read the acknowledgments, read about the author, especially acknowledgments are so good. They tell so much about the writer that wrote that piece. If you can see yourself in, I do that too, where I've got contacts there, then you can start seeing yourself as a writer. And I think seeing yourself as a writer, not an author, a writer. They're not books, they're manuscripts. And, they're not books till they're out there and you finished it, in my opinion. Once you can start seeing yourself in those shoes, things change for you and there's a shift. And a couple of things happen. One, your life is never your own again, and you have a very difficult time balancing your work with your private life because that becomes your life. And reading is ruined for you forever because you never read a book. You never read a book for pleasure first. You read it and you're editing all the time, and then you read it for pleasure. So it's an interesting path, but it requires patience and it requires confidence. Not arrogance, but confidence for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think there really are some parallels on our path. I don't think I started writing for an income for 9 years. It's also, I wasn't actively looking to become a writer at that point. I still wanted to be a full-time musician, which I was, and I did. And that was its own path. And the first gig I ever got was for a music industry tech startup, and it was more of a comprehensive role than it was a blogger role. I handled all of the digital marketing for a while, but that was a great gig. I enjoyed it, and that led me to write my first book eventually. So neat experience.
That's true. I was going to just ask you in that, you don't know, did you feel you didn't know it was going to lead you to a place, but what you learned in that position certainly was if it was a springboard to what you were going to do, or it was a road to the path you were on to do more.
It was. It taught me so much, and I ended up making a lot of contacts. In fact, I think those contacts led me to all the freelancing and staff writing and ghostwriting work that I continued to have for many years after. So yeah, it was very formative in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because the other thing that I do find if new writers are listening is don't let people push you into one genre. When you first start writing, you don't know what genre you want to write. And as a developmental editor, which is a role I've fallen into over the years, for me, if someone comes to me, for example, a couple of weeks ago and said, they'd heard about me from someone else. I did a book for a police officer in North Dakota, and it's a pretty heavy book. It's her memoir. But this person wanted to write a horror novel, and I love working on fiction, but horror is not something I read. Yet she asked if I would look the other way on the genre, because what I do know is story. And she was right. Like, I know what makes good story. So if I can sort of move in the room of horror, she knows what she wants to write as far as the horror. I know what makes readers read books, and we could combine that. So not getting fixed on one genre, I think, is really important early in your career, and then you can carry that out into the world, because some people will say, well, maybe they only write memoirs and they're not a poet. Well, I've been writing poetry for years,
Yeah.
but I don't write poetry when I'm asked to write a nonfiction book.
Yeah. I think that's great advice too. I still want to try my hand at a few things like poetry and fiction. Most of my books are nonfiction, not devoid of personality, because honestly, I really care about that. And in fact, I made it a point to put a lot more personality into Productivity, Performance, and Profits Black Book, which ended up becoming an award-winning book, and putting a lot of humor into it too. I felt that was important. Like, if you can make a topic like productivity interesting, I think you're doing something right.
This is what I think, and I love what you just said, because everything is story. And I was giving a little talk at someone, at Matt Key's presentation last month when I was up in Canada, and I said the same thing that I say in to lots of people, and I probably won't say it right, because there is an Indigenous quote that speaks to this. But if someone shows me a whole bunch of facts and figures, I can believe them. And if someone draws a map for me, I can follow it. But if someone tells me a story, that's what lives in my heart forever. And so I truly believe that every book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, every memoir, it's all story. And so even though there are different arts and different genres out there, the more story you make it, the more readers will remember it. And I just think it's so important to remember that when you're writing anything.
Very well said. Are there any projects that you're particularly proud of? I mean, I'm sure there's some that you can't mention, just like I can't mention all of my ghostwritten articles online, but
some I can't mention, but some I can. I will say that the ones that I want to say that I'm most proud of aren't published yet, because they're mine, and I've been signed for them by a publisher, but I end up saying yes to so many other projects that they don't get done. I'll spin around and grab one.
Sure.
That happened in October, published last October. And this memoir is changing the world. It's called 12 Elephants and a Dragon. And I met this gentleman through another person I'd worked with. And they're like, I really want you to meet this guy. He, in his early teenage years, after the fall of Saigon, left Ho Chi Minh City, traveled to the coast, got on a boat with his family, and they were adrift on the South China Sea for quite some time. Then they were on an island that had never been inhabited before for a year, almost a year. And then they were cataloged, and they were able to come to Canada, and he became a doctor. So when I wrote his memoir, it took a long, long time, and we had a publisher. And then at the end of that, there were some concerns with his family, one family member, that it shouldn't be published. And so he phoned me and said, destroy every file. And I begged him, could we just keep one, because I think this will change. His message for the world is all about generosity and kindness and benevolence. He's just the most incredible guy. And sure enough, 18 months later, after I destroyed every interview but kept one copy of the manuscript, he called me. We found another publisher. The family member had come to terms with what was happening. There was nothing really in the book that was dangerous for the family. It was a personal issue. And the book was published last October, and it is just going crazy. And what I love about it is the intent behind the book. And the part that I'm proud of is that the day after, 5 minutes after he met me, he hired me. That night, I had a vision of a dragon inside a child speaking to the man who he is across the table and saying they had to do the book. And I wrote that probably in 20 minutes. And I felt like kind of silly, but I sent it to him because I felt I had to. And he wrote back and he said, "You're in my head." And that became the first chapter, and it never changed over the 4 years we worked on the book. And so what I'm most proud of is I stuck to my intuition through that book. I didn't try to pretend after that something I wrote was silly or shouldn't be shared with him. And I'm just so glad to be part of that project, because he's changing the world for people in terms of the way that they look at the world. So it's just such an amazing project. So that's one. There've been lots of others like that too, but that's one that stands out in my mind. Yeah.
That is really cool. How do you stay inspired? You know, our whole group about Spark Infinity, the idea is that we gotta have infinite inspiration to be prolific and productive. What keeps you going?
Well, I'd like to hear you answer that, and I'll answer it first by saying I don't have a choice. Like, I never understand it. I try to be very empathetic or compassionate to people who say they've got writer's block or they have they're not inspired. I have way too many books in my head that I have time to write them. Sometimes when a project comes along, I have a hard time saying no. And initially, as the project gets going, I sometimes confuse inspiration with concern that I might not be able to do it. Who am I to do it? Imposter syndrome. Why should I be the one that does it? How will I possibly finish this book? And I've got a couple of projects I'm on now that have gone on way too long, but I stuck with them because I dug my feet in and said the manuscript that was sent to me wasn't good enough for the life that this person had lived. And so it has cost me in my time and obviously in compensation. But the inspiration never leaves. Even when I'm down or sad or frustrated or even resentful that, oh my gosh, I've spent so many hours on this project. I'm not even making money now. I'm spending money to be on this project. There is something about the project itself that isn't project, but is service and a calling. And so I don't have experience with not being inspired. I'm always hopeful that I can inspire other people by giving them different exercises to do or think about things or walk away and work on another project. But I've never had to deal with not being inspired. How about you?
One of the things for sure, there's many things that inspire me, but one of the things is just exploring the depths of the rabbit hole. This world is such a strange, fascinating place. And every time I have conversations like these or read a book and I have to be pretty intentional now because I've read a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've heard a lot of stuff. I've been down some of the deepest conspiracy tunnels you could go down. And so I have to keep looking for that type of inspiration. But it is one of the things that for whatever reason, it's not like I have to know these things per se. Or like believe in them per se. I just kind of want to know about them. And see what it is that people are talking about in the whole conspiracy world, or just the depths of spirituality or our history or what really happened in our history. So that kind of stuff definitely fascinates me.
I like that. I'm going to say, you said like these topics interest you, and I think where I am is people interest me, which I'm sure you're saying people interest you as well. And so for me, I would say a lot of my inspiration on projects that are not my own, but become my own, is because when I meet up with a client, I have a very strong ethic that I am in service to them. And that is my first thing is this is my service. This is where I focus. There's no phone open while I'm listening to their story. There's no other tabs open. I am focused on only that person. And what happens is it becomes like this what are we going to say? This buzzword, co-creation. And their book becomes a co-creation. And I don't need my name on the cover. I don't need my name anywhere. Often it happens that people want to do that. I form a relationship with people. And I think that has to come and it first before, probably to my detriment, that comes before business. And I'm not a good business person, although I am making my living as a writer. And I just think that being in service to others and having gratitude and feeling their feelings helps me continue to work. Now, last year was supposed to be my last year ghostwriting. I decided that I would stop and I would only work on my own projects and then handpick some others. But that hasn't stopped because I was just given someone else who has just the most incredible story ever. And someone asked if I would meet with him, and a publisher asked if I would meet with him and discuss the project with him. And I put myself out there. I knew he was interviewing many other people who are way more famous, and not famous, but many more people that have more credibility and on paper than I do in terms of what they've worked on and how they put themselves out there in social media. But I met with him and I met him where he was, and I met him from where I come from, which is a place of love, place of interest, to be interested in people and be interesting to people. And I was surprised, but I was surprised, but I wasn't, that, within a day, the publisher got back to me and said, he wants to work with you. And I was like, oh, darn, because I really didn't want to do any more books. But then, now we've had 5 or 6 interviews. I'm getting his story recorded because I will be writing it. He will not be writing it. And I can't believe that I would think to say no to him, because his story is so incredible and, again, has the power to change people's lives. So I don't know. I just find that ghostwriting is people don't understand it quite as much. But as far as my attitude with people is, these are partnerships and these are intimate relationships in terms of what you learn about someone's life and what they trust you with, and it's such a privilege.
I like that a lot. I hear you may also have some fascinating stories about libraries in Mexico.
I'm not sure what we mean about that. But what I will say about Mexico, because I've lived here now for full time for how many years? 16 years. I'm back to Canada when I need to be. What I think is Mexico is a very misunderstood place. And I'm in a very small town, but still literacy is very important to people, even the people that live what we would call a very simple life. And so it's taken seriously, and books are very expensive to publish here. But when you go into the big cities, like in March, I was in Morelia, which is just the most amazing city I've traveled in so far in Mexico. It's a university city with beautiful plazas, and there's a bookstore on every corner, and libraries just allow you to go in. I was in one library that it was, what year was it? 1300s. It was a a religious center for, I don't know if it was monks or sisters, some kind of colonizers, and then it was turned into university library years later, and just this sort of reverence to books. So I find what happens with Mexico is people will say, oh, are you scared to live there? There can't be a very interesting place in terms of, it's not got a Harvard, or it's not got a, different universities in Canada that are that are, well known for their specialties. And it's such a misunderstood place because even in the very, very poorest places, there are little places with books for children that can't afford them to look. And in some of the cities, just incredible libraries with material that is, obviously it's all in Spanish, but it's still just, you can feel the atmosphere. So I think the interesting stories that I have is in terms of the misunderstanding that people have that it's either Cancun or it's not developed. And nothing could be farther from the truth because literacy is so important here. And unfortunately, many people are illiterate, but it's still really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah. I would actually assume it to be more developed than ever. Like even countries like Philippines are really starting to come along in that sense too. So, but I look forward to the day I get to visit Mexico again. I did in my youth, and that time I was helping out an orphanage, I think.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, maybe next time I'll just get to enjoy the sights.
Come down and I'll show you the sights.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. I'd appreciate that. Well, is there anything else we should have covered?
I don't know. I think that just trying to think off the top of my head here, just if people are listening, like you're very new to me in my life, and I have this great feeling about how kind and giving you are. And so I love that about you. And so that's why I agreed to join a couple of Spark meetings and join the group and share. So if the majority of people that are listening are looking to be more creative, it just takes that one extra step to trust themselves and just put it out there. I haven't planned anything that I was going to say, but really to end on that, if, feel that, I guess this is going to sound very cliche or cheesy, but, you're called Spark. Let that spark. When you, as a social worker, when I would work with people, I would have them take away all the roles that they have, sister, brother, client, what a teacher, whatever they did, and whatever was left there is a spark. I always said it was a spark. And it's just like, get down to that spark and then just like, let it go, because I think we can be our own worst enemy in terms of creativity, and other people can believe in us and we still feel like imposters in our own joy and in our own expression, our own creative expression. Yes. So yeah, something like that.
I think that's a fantastic. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic note to end on. And I will also point out that Flashes of Elation is kind of about that whole creativity, sensitivity thing that many of us do end up traversing through. I don't think it's every creative or creator, but some of us certainly grew up with that or were exposed to different environments or people that made us far more sensitive to those around us, and that's a journey all its own. So if that's something listeners or viewers find interesting, then we'd invite you to have a look. Marie, this has been fantastic. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's so great. I'll come back anytime to do something specific if you like, whatever you like. It's great that you're spreading the word to just embrace creativity.
Absolutely. We'll plan something fun next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Spark Infinity.